Our story begins in beautiful New York City. Eddie Mora is an aspiring writer who is yet to make it big. He has recently gotten a book contract, which is a big deal for him. First problem is that it has been months and he has still not written a single page. Eddie can't seem to figure it out and because of this, falls into a depression where he spends his time drinking at bars or sinking into the couch in his trashed apartment. We meet Eddie's fiancée, Lindy. Lindy says that with her own career progressing, she cannot afford to be held back any longer. She breaks up with him. Eddie can't believe this and tries to beg for her back, saying how much he loves her and wants her with him for the rest of his life. But she leaves. Way to put fuel on the fire, Lindy. Now, sadly walking home, Eddie gets stopped in the street by a good-looking dude, Vernon.
Eddie Mora. What's it been, like 9 years?
Vernon is Eddie's ex-wife Melissa's brother. They were married for a short time after college, and Eddie briefly remembered Vernon as her degenerate drug-dealing brother. Vernon says that those days are well behind him. We'll see. Vernon lets him know that Melissa is remarried and now has 2 kids. Eddie tells him that he's been trying to write a book and admits that he's been struggling. Vernon can see that Eddie is having a hard time creatively and offers a special gift. He reaches into his jacket's pocket and pulls out a small pill.
Not like some offshore lab making fake Viagra. Come on, Vernon.
But Vernon says that the pill is legal. The name for this pill is NZT, and Vernon tells him that it simply helps unlock neural receptors in the brain, letting the user access 100% of their brain power. Eddie is intrigued. I am too. Vernon gets interrupted by an urgent phone call, which makes him get up to leave. Before leaving, Vernon gives Eddie his card, saying that they should meet again soon. Eddie rejects his offer, saying that he doesn't need a drug to help him. Vernon tells him that a single pill costs $800. Damn, maybe I could afford that if you guys like and subscribe. Anyways, now walking home, Eddie is reflecting on his life, realizing that life cannot get any worse, so he decides to take the NZT pill. Eddie arrives at his apartment and gets rudely interrupted by his landlord's wife, who yells at him for being late again on his rent. She is ranting when all of a sudden things get blurry. The NZT is for sure kicking in. All of a sudden, everything around him becomes quiet. His eyes with laser focus notice a book in the lady's bag about law, and without hesitation spews to the lady, saying that the lady may not like him, but there's something bigger that is bothering her. He brings up law school and points out her book. Suddenly, he realizes he can actually remember seeing the book as well as every single thing he has ever read, seen and heard. Eddie deflects her anger by recommending a book that would better suit her assignment, along with some advice. This changes her attitude as now she begins showing interest, even attraction to him by his extensive knowledge of law. She invites him in, where he helps her with her assignment and gets some action. I need this pill, man. Eddie is confused about what the hell just happened and how he has this knowledge all of a sudden. The drug allows him to organize every single piece of information in his head, and anything he has ever read and seen is now able to be accessed. He uses this newfound clarity to start getting his life together. He cleans his entire apartment and with ease writes a 90-page draft of his book. The pill does not give him just knowledge, but also confidence and motivation, which helps him with his tasks. The following morning, the effects of the pill have worn off. Eddie goes to the novel office with his book draft and hands it to the editor, who is doubtful but reads it anyway. He gets a call later that day receiving praise, saying they want to see more. Eddie decides that he needs more NZT and heads to Vernon's apartment. Eddie knocks on the door and is welcomed by a beaten Vernon. Eddie asks him what happened, but he does not tell him. Vernon instead tells him that NZT is not legal and has not gone through any testing, but Eddie still wants more. Vernon tells him that he will give him some more if he can do some chores for him, so he agrees. Arriving back at Vernon's apartment, he notices that the door is busted open. The apartment is a complete mess, and he finds Vernon on the couch with a bullet in his head. He calls the police and scrambles to find any NZT pills that Vernon could have hid. He remembered Vernon saying that he doesn't cook, and his attention pans to the oven. Eddie finds the Holy Grail, a clear bag full of NZT and some cash. Moments later, the police bang on his door and skip to Eddie now at the police station, where he is getting questioned. The police have to reason to keep him and say that they will call him if anything comes up. Back at home now, Eddie takes another pill and once again, everything is full of color as his new life is about to begin. With the newfound cash, thanks to Vernon, Eddie goes out and gets a haircut and some new clothes. He starts working out and even finishes his book in 4 days. Now with just time on his hands, he spends the following 3 days and masters the piano. He notices that he can learn any language by listening to it. With all his new knowledge and confidence, he starts going out, using his charm to impress almost everyone. His ability to communicate about anything, and even finds himself on even playing field with very wealthy businessmen. He has a moment of realization and knows what he needs to do. He takes advantage of his relationships with stockbrokers and gets a job on Wall Street. Eddie starts reading books on trading and studies the stock market's movement. He took the last of Vernon's money, about $800, and took it to $2,000 on his first day. The next day, makes it $7,500. Eddie needs more capital to grow his trading account even more and seeks help from a loan shark, Giannotti. Giannotti meets with Eddie and agrees to give him a loan, but says that if he does not pay it back there will be a problem. Eddie accepts and we now see him back at the firm, trading stocks at a high volume. Within 2 weeks, the brokerage account was worth over $2 million. His name starts going around and gets a meeting with the top Wall Street tycoon. Also, that night Lindy goes to a nice dinner with Eddie where he tells her about his new cleaned up life. She can't believe this and is extremely proud of him. He says that the wake-up call she gave him was all he needed. I see what he did there. After dinner, they go back to Lindy's place where he gets laid. They spend the next week hanging out again, and Lindy starts falling in love with the new Eddie again. She even admits to him that they should get back together. As sweet as this reunion has been, Eddie's superhuman instincts focus on a new problem. Someone is watching him. Later that day, back at Lindy's apartment, Eddie looks out the window trying to find the guy from earlier. Lindy tells him to join her in bed, when all of a sudden Eddie loses focusness, stumbles, and weirdly gets transported into the hallway. This confuses him as he is yet to have this sort of side effect from NZT. We skip to the following day, which is his meeting with the Wall Street tycoon, Carl Van Loon. Carl's associate confronts Eddie about how he was able to grow so fast without much experience, thinking he is a fraud. But, with ease Eddie answers with grace and knowledge and impresses them both. Leaving the meeting, Carl and Eddie get into a cab where Carl asks Eddie to take a look through all of his many companies' files. He asks him to find any patterns and if he recommends a plan of action. Eddie understands that Carl is asking because he is trying to do a huge company merger with a competing company. Carl is impressed because nobody should be able to figure all that out in such a short time. Carl asks if Eddie can restructure the deals and get them to him the next day. The cab stops and Eddie gets out and accepts Carl's challenge. Instead of going inside, Eddie decides to take a walk. His enjoyment is short-lived as he starts having the weird teleporting symptoms again as he finds himself in different parts of the city, not knowing how he got there. We see him go in and out of consciousness and stumble through clubs, and even ends up in a hotel room with a random model where he gets laid. The risk is worth the reward, am I right? What Eddie doesn't know is that strange man that he caught watching him earlier has been following him. Eddie leaves the model and goes into the subway, but to add to his bad run, gets into a fight with thugs. Thankfully, he recalls every self-defense and action movie he's ever seen, so is able to single-handedly take them out. He runs away and now somehow ends up on top of the Brooklyn Bridge. It is the morning and Eddie has no idea what the hell has happened over the past 18 hours. He goes home to get some rest but his alarm goes off, forgetting about his meeting with Carl. Eddie arrives at the meeting without taking NZT and is noticeably less focused. Carl notices that Eddie is different this morning and asks him about Hank Atwood, the owner of the competing company in the merger. Carl explains that Hank was a nobody, and out of nowhere had a big rise in the world of stock trading. Eddie isn't listening to what Carl is saying as his eyes are glued to the TV, which shows a report of a woman found dead at a hotel, the same woman that he hooked up with the previous night. Eddie loses it and abruptly leaves the meeting, only stopping to throw up, thinking that he killed someone. He goes home and gets a call from Melissa. Eddie asks her if they can meet up, which she agrees to. While waiting, Eddie uses Vernon's notebook to find out more about NZT and its side effects. He calls each of the phone numbers and is blessed with the worst news. Every answer is saying that the person Eddie asked about is dead. He calls another number, and Eddie can hear the voice on the other line. His head eerily turns and it is the man that has been following him. Eddie takes off running and the guy chases him. Eddie runs through the busy streets, barely gets into a cab to go to his rendezvous with Melissa. He is safe for now. Melissa tells Eddie that Vernon's death was not a surprise and that she has known about NZT for a while. She admitted that she also took it, but because of its effect on the brain, she says that she is still not back to normal, and it results in mental fatigue and other neurological problems. It caused her to lose all motivation despite being off of it for 2 years. She warns Eddie to get off before it's too late. Eddie heads home and runs into Gennady, who is not happy about his late payment. On their way up to Eddie's apartment, Eddie drops his last NZT pill. Gennady notices this and takes it, not knowing what it is. They then go to the bank, where Eddie gets him the money. Gennady makes a remark saying that the pill makes him feel great and will need more. Oh great. Now, Eddie, so weak from the side effects, makes his way to Lindy's office where he falls to the floor and tells her everything. He asks if she can go retrieve a hidden stash that he left, so she goes home and gets the pills. As she gets into a cab to go back to Eddie, she sees the same man chasing her. She gets out and runs, making her way through the park, even stopping to ask strangers to help her, who get immediately killed by this dude. Seriously, what is with this guy? Lindy hides as the man is getting close and calls Eddie for help. Eddie says that she needs to take one of the pills, so she does. Moments later, the NZT activates and she knows what to do. She can see the route she needs to take and takes off through the park. She runs through the ice rink and strategically swings a girl wearing ice skates at him and is able to cut him. She returns to Eddie and gives him the pills, and tells him that he needs to get off of it after experiencing what it did to herself. Eddie promises that he will once he makes enough money. Eddie looks out the window and sees Gennady spying on him. Eddie confronts him and Gennady says that he needs more pills. pills. Eddie complies and gives him a few but realizes that this is just the beginning. To protect himself, Eddie hires 2 bodyguards, and also moves into a top-of-the-line apartment complex with the newest security tech. Eddie tries to meet with Carl again, now that he is back on NZT. Carl is not impressed with Eddie's apology, but is impressed by the merger projections he finally did. Soon, Eddie will broker what he calls the biggest merger in corporate history between Carl and Hank's companies. Eddie now begins to optimize his life. He deducts that if he gets enough sleep, is healthy, doesn't drink alcohol, and maintains a steady dose of the drug, that his weird side effects will disappear. He gets custom suits made with holding compartments for extra pills and even has a chemist reverse engineer NZT to make more of his own. While at lunch, he notices the detective that questioned him about Vernon's death. The detective tells him that he is a suspect in the model's death as someone pointed him at the scene. Eddie hires Morris Brandt, one of the top attorneys in New York. Brandt gets the police to let him go as the evidence is too weak. Back to business, Carl and Eddie meet with Hank and his team to go over the merger's terms. Eddie notices that Hank's health is deteriorating despite not even being 60 years old. Interesting. Later, Eddie is back on the street and runs into Gennady, who also has his own bodyguards. Eddie gets blackmailed by Gennady, who says that he needs 20 more pills or will pin the model's death on him. The next day, the merger contract signing is scheduled, and Carl is worried because Hank is late. Soon after, Hank's wife arrives and tells them that her husband suddenly got extremely ill and is in the hospital. She lets Carl and Eddie know that they still want to proceed as soon as Hank is well. They walk Ms. Atwood down to the lobby, and Eddie sees that her driver is the man who has been stalking him. Eddie goes down to the police station to meet up with Brandt to do a lineup. He takes his jacket off and gives it to Brandt. Eddie passes the test and Brandt gives him the jacket back, and mentions how nice of a jacket it is.
It's a thing of beauty. You have that made?
I did.
Eddie goes back to the office and learns that Hank is now in a coma. He goes to the bathroom to take his next pill and realizes that the pills that were hidden in his jacket are now gone. Where could they be? He goes to see Carl and is surprised with a package. Eddie opens the box and is horrified to see the hands of his bodyguards. He leaves the office and goes home. He stares at the TV observing and waiting for any updates on Hank's health and realizes that Brandt is his lawyer as well. It all makes sense to him now and Eddie just starts laughing from the situation. I'm still confused. Anyways, Eddie hears loud banging at his door, so he checks the security cameras. He sees Gennady and his bodyguards trying to break in. They are using metal grinders to cut through the front door. Feeling the gravity of the situation, Eddie stands on the ledge of his balcony, ready to jump. He tries to use the last of his brain's ability to recall any pills left around, and actually finds a memory of one he left in an old container. He finds it a moment too late as the goons break in, causing Eddie to trip and drop the pill. Gennady's guards hold Eddie back and Gennady tells Eddie about his improved way of using NZT, by injecting it straight into the bloodstream. This way, it lasts longer and hits faster. Eddie looks around the look trying to think of any escape. He notices that one of the guards is half blind. Gennady takes out a torture kit that he plans to use on Eddie to get more NZT out of him. While the guards are in the other room now, trying to open the safe, Gennady gets close to Eddie to start torturing him but gets stabbed by a knife that Eddie was hiding. They both struggle for a moment, but Eddie is able to finish him off. A weakened Eddie now lays on the floor, thinking about his next move. He sees the syringe that Gennady used to inject the NZT and he realizes that he must drink Gennady's blood as a last-ditch effort to save himself. Somehow, it works and Eddie is back in the game. Eddie plays dead and waits for the guard to turn him over, who is instantly welcomed by a needle in his only good eye. Fair play, Eddie. The other guard comes in and Eddie now uses his superhuman IQ to strategically fight them both off. Eddie almost gets choked out, but is able to push the guy off and funny enough gets shot at by the now blind bodyguard. He empties his clip trying to hit Eddie to no avail, as Eddie manages to disable him by pushing a piano into him. Meanwhile, we see that Hank Atwood has died. Eddie goes to the hospital and sits next to the man that has been following him. He asks how Hank died even though they were able to get him the NZT pills he needed. Remember, the ones from his jacket. The man helps Eddie find Brandt, who actually kept the pills for himself instead of giving them to Hank, causing him to die. Eddie finds the drugs that Brandt stole. A year goes by and Eddie now has a book out and is running for governor. He gets a call that someone who represents a large pharmaceutical company wants to meet with him and is in his office. Eddie is surprised to see that it is Carl. Carl tells Eddie that he no longer is on Wall Street and transitioned into the pharmaceutical industry and that he knows about NZT, telling him that the new company he owns actually makes the drug. Carl offers Eddie an ongoing supply of pills if he can do some favors in exchange. Eddie refuses the offer, and Carl remarks that all of the other suppliers have been shut down and his company is the sole producer. They leave the office, and Eddie reveals that he no longer takes NZT. Remember when he was getting the compound reverse engineered? He had the drug modified and they removed all the side effects. He reduced his dose little by little until he no longer needed it, but still retained its neurological effects. Eddie is able to use 100% of his brain completely off of the drug. To show this to Carl, he predicts a car accident before it even happens and even tells Carl that he has heart problems just by touching him. Carl threatens Eddie that he does not want to make an enemy out of him, but Eddie simply says that he will always be 50 steps ahead. We now see the evolved Eddie, who is bound by nobody, the Eddie that is limitless. This was a great movie and I just wish I was able to take NZT so I could make a ton of more videos for you guys. I give this an 89%. Thanks for watching. Make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications for more videos like this.